Finally, today we get to talk organs. We get to jump up one rung in what we've been doing with cells up to tissues, tissues up to organs, organs ultimately into organ systems. One of the things that I'm hoping you'll do is realize, why have we been doing all the histology? Why are we talking about all of these different things called tissues? Well, we need to put them together to ultimately build one of us, an organism. The skin is the largest organ. It's estimated somewhere around two square, let me see if I've got that number. Yeah, about roughly 2 square meters of surface area, which really isn't that important, but as long as you understand that there's a lot of skin, all you have to do is look at you. You've got it all over your body. So how does it function? How does it do its job? And you can't see this, but I've jotted some things over here. I'll probably move the iPad in a minute. But I want to focus on 3 things today. I want to talk about the function. What are the functions of the skin? Skin, we quite often overlook, but there's more than just one function to kind of keep our insides from falling out. So I want to play around with function. What are some of them? Then I want to look at form. Now that we have the function down, how does this facilitate that? How does it allow us to do the functions that we'll identify? And then some extras. We'll talk about things like individual glands. We'll also include in there why you get goosebumps. Even in a scary movie, when it's not even cold out, you'll get goosebumps. What is this skin all about? Hopefully I can do this in 2 videos. I might roll into 3. I like talking about the skin. It's a nice simple organ to start to introduce these organs as we move forward. So functions, here we go again. I would have said, oh, what are the functions? What do you think the skin is for? Let me cut right to the chase. One is protection. This protects us from the rest of the universe. And it does it in 3 different ways. There's chemical protection, there's physical protection, and then there's biological. So 3 different ways that we have to protect ourselves from the randomness that is the rest of the universe. Chemical, physical, and biological. Now, what are they? And I'm going to just give you a couple of examples. When it comes to chemical, we maintain a relatively low pH. It's what we call an acid mantle. So our skin is a little bit acidic on the outside. So bacteria that end up landing on our skin before they can get to the inside, a number of them are destroyed by the acid mantle that we all possess. 2, physical. Physical, as we go through a 40-day journey up through here, you're going to realize that this keratin is going to be a really important physical barrier between us and the rest of the world. As we move up in this direction, we are going to get more and more and more keratinized. So we're going to put this particular molecule around the cells, which really kind of waterproofs it. Also, melanin. Melanin is a really, really, really dark pigment. If you have dark eyes, look at the eyes. If you really want to see melanin, look right down the middle of your eyeball in the pupil. The reason it's so black is it's just loaded with melanin. Well, melanin is going to physically protect us from sunlight and the damage of sunlight, which is why we tend to become darker in the summer months. A lot of exposure to UV, and we produce more melanin. And we're going to see melanin produced by little cells that are called melanocytes. There's that site suffix once again for a cell. So we've got the world of chemical, low pH, the acid mantle, physical, keratin, and melanin. And then we also have biological. And biological is the fact that we have macrophages that are wandering around in this particular organ. Macrophages are the big eaters. These are the cells that look for bacteria, that look for things that have invaded you, and they attempt to eat them and destroy them. Probably the idea of protection is the first one that comes to mind. And you're like, okay, let's move on to form and structures and all these fancy terms. But there's more. Metabolism is another one. Skin does metabolize. A big thing that we do is we produce vitamin D. This time of year, making this video in March, we don't have a lot of sun. We don't have a big photo period. We need sunlight to turn cholesterol into vitamin D. And we do that here. So it's much more than just protection. Temperature regulation, that's another one. I mentioned hair raising and goosebumps. It tries to trap warm air near the surface. If you get too hot, you know what you do. You sweat. And so the liquid, the primarily water that enters onto the surface is wicked off, and that's wicked off along with heat. Also, blood vessels. We've got circulatory system in here. We can dilate or we can constrict blood flow going into this particular organ if we need to. So a lot of temperature regulation going on here as well. Absorption. We don't absorb a lot through the skin because the first thing I mentioned was protection in this keratin layer, but we can absorb things through the skin. One is, say for example, acetone. So if you're doing work, woodworking or working on auto body finish and you deal with acetone, you can absorb that right into the body through the skin. Fentanyl is another one that's a big deal, because if you're dealing with somebody who is overdosing on fentanyl, you may be able to absorb that through your skin as well. And think about drugs when it comes to patches. You can get patches that are nicotine patches. You just stick them on the outside and that substance will be absorbed through. So not a lot of absorption, but there is some there. Excretion will go in the opposite direction. We can excrete onto the surface, and a couple of things that I'll try and make, let me do it over here, try and make some room. Urea and sodium chloride or salt. Some of you might have experienced this directly. So, urea is a nitrogen-based waste, and we secrete it onto the surface along with sweat. Salt, if you work outside in the summer, if you've ever thrown on a bandana or a baseball hat, and then you've worked really hard and sweated like crazy, you might have recognized that after you take the hat off and it dries, you're gonna have a salt layer all the way around the outside of it. So excretion, absorption, temperature regulation, metabolism, protection, and there's one more that I want to point out, and it's sensation, it's sensory. We have a number of different little endings, and we've got these free nerves in here that allow us to pick up pain and soft touch and deep touch. So it's a sensory organ as well, and quite often we don't think about that. Now, before I kill this first one and switch over to a second one, I want to look at the layers when it gets to the point of form. The most superficial is the epidermis, so the epidermal layers. These cells last for about 40 days or so. We'll talk about that in a minute. Below that, we have the dermis, which I'm going to divide into two layers. The epidermis I'll divide into a number of layers also. And then this is fat on this image that I just stole, or I'm using from Encyclopedia Britannica. There's more than fat down here. This is also known as the hypodermis. So if we look at these terms, we've got the centerpiece of the dermis, we've got the epidermis above it, we've got the hypodermis below it, which is exactly what the names tell us. So from here, when I switch over to the next one, I'll explain what we're about to do. We're going to look at the epidermis, we'll take a look at the dermis, and we'll take a look at the hypodermis. Not quite sure if that's going to be the order we go in, or whether I want to turn it around. I'll figure that out in the next 5 or 6 minutes. So I will see you in just a minute.